Hi, I'm Aurora DeDios from the Philippines. Um, I've been a participant of the CSW for the last 10 years now and have been quite involved in the preparations for the Beijing Conference on Women and the subsequent years following that up to the Beijing Plus 10. It's amazing that when you look back 10 years ago, how women have come to embrace the principles, the ideals, and the vision of Beijing, which is that women need not accept their subordinate position and that women must be treated as human beings with rights and freedoms that they deserve all along. In the last 10 years, we have seen very, very promising gains by the women's movement. Of course, at the international level, we have seen that international human rights instruments are now aware and are sensitive to the distinct needs and interests of women. And international human rights instruments such as the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women is an instrument that has acquired almost universal recognition. Through such instruments and through the Beijing Platform for Action, governments are now more committed to realizing and fulfilling the rights of women through, among others, legal reform, provision of services, as well as initiatives that try to change the attitudes and behavior of both men and women so that they can treat each other equally. At the same time, I've been quite involved at the NGO level, and the particular issue that touches on the human rights of women all over the world. We have seen that in the last 10 years, trafficking, which heretofore was not an acknowledged issue, has now been acknowledged by governments at the official level. At the same time, we have also seen, unfortunately, the several movements and campaigns for prostitution to be acknowledged as a legitimate sector and as a mainstream part of the economy that could provide jobs, that could generate incomes for governments. And yet the price, the social costs that this entail on the lives of women and children are so devastating that it has to be acknowledged as a human rights violation in global proportions. What we now have is a tension between these two movements, and whilst the struggle is very hard and is very difficult, I think we are getting to a point where women and governments and the women in the women's movements, NGOs, are looking at this issue critically and how prostitution and trafficking must be considered a human rights violation and violence against women rather than as an income-generating activity. I think what the gains of Beijing Plus 10 are very clear, that these rights, these freedoms, are no longer subject to government intrusions or government distortions, and that they must be institutionalized and they must find their way into the local laws and initiatives of governments as well as civil society. I think that the steps forward, we have moved quite a bit in terms of defining the major issues that must be tackled by both government and civil society, and that we have some of the innovative practices and programs that could lead us forward. I think the greatest danger that we have to watch out for are some of the impacts of globalization that have adversely affected the gains that we now have. A second source of concern are the differences, the diversities of opinion and perspectives, some of which tend to undermine the gains that we have already achieved, and question some of the standards and norms that took years to institutionalize. I'm very hopeful, and this I see from the young women who have come forward in this Beijing +10 conference. Listen and get involved in the dialogue, in the discourse, and the continuing discourse to make gender equality a reality. Gender equality will not come about on its own. It's not a self-propelling vision. It has to be, a struggle at every step, and it has to be a struggle within and without, a struggle with external forces, the structural inequalities, but it's also a struggle within. That is to say that women have to critically reflect whether or not the standards, the norms, and the values that they hold dear are going to benefit the generations of women and men for the coming